They're the clear dominant player with the best position and really all the pieces for the future of retail media coming into place as well. I think where it gets interesting is debating the next players because they're all circling the space. In fact, everybody's looking at retail media right now and trying to figure out what their play is.
Hey gang, it's Monday, April 4th. April 4th?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's how you say it. For some reason, I thought that fourth had like the art, like fourth, but that's third. It's going to be a good show.
Ford.
It's April 4th.
It's April. April.
April, yeah.
April? Wait, what's that? What does that mean?
Paul knows.
Oh.
Like when you
As in hey.
like when you say H or H.
Oh, yeah. Yes. HBO.
Oh, I see what you're saying. We're off to a flying start. Oh, God. Andrew, Paul, and listeners, welcome to the... If you're still with us, thanks for not pressing pause. Welcome to the Behind the Numbers Daily, an e-marketer podcast made possible by mParticle. I'm Marcus, and today I'm joined by our principal analyst who's on our retail and e-commerce team. It's Andrew Lipsman.
Hey, Marcus.
Hey, chap. We're also joined by our principal analyst who runs our advertising and media practice. It's Paul Werner.
It's an honor to be here.
Hello. Thanks for saying that, even if it's probably not.
It is for sure.
Okay, cheers. Today's fact. Which country produces the most oil? Do you guys know? It's kind of a...
Russia? Venezuela?
It's kind of a trick question.
That is a good one. No, I don't know.
America.
I was just going to say, is it the U.S.?
Surprisingly, the United States became the world's largest petroleum producer in the last 10 years, according to the International Energy Statistics. The states produced nearly 19 million barrels of oil per day in 2020. It's not even close. That's nearly double the daily production of Saudi Arabia, the world's second biggest oil producer. The US accounts for 20% of world oil production, Saudi Arabia 12%, Russia 11% in third place. So there's that Russia that Andrew mentioned. Who do you think consumes the most?
America.
Of course.
By far.
As well as producing the most oil, the US consumes the most. Rather coincidentally, it also consumes 20%. It produces 20% of the world's oil and it consumes 20% of it. China consumes 14% in second place and India 5% in third. Anyway, today's real topic. Is Seattle, not Silicon Valley, the future of digital advertising? Part 1. So, we're talking about whether Seattle, not Silicon Valley, is the future of digital advertising. Why are we talking about this? Well, let's turn to Andrew, because Andrew, it was your thoughts that made this episode a reality. What got you thinking about this concept of the gravity of things shifting from one place to another?
Well, I guess the first thing is that we've seen the changes that have been happening in Silicon Valley due to the changes in iOS tracking and the impact that that's had on Facebook and potentially on Google and maybe, the last era of digital advertising. So we're kind of at an industry inflection point. And then I've also been spending a lot of my time thinking about the rise of retail media and Amazon in particular. We've talked about this quite a bit, but Amazon's ad business is oftentimes, it's even more sprawling, I think, or has a potential to be more sprawling than we're initially appreciating. It's getting into a bit of everything. Digital out of home. There have been some recent rumblings about them bringing in-store media into the equation. They're doing a lot more with streaming audio. So they're trying to push that area, which is a growth area for digital advertising. So there's a lot to what Amazon is doing on the digital advertising front. But the other one that got me thinking was Microsoft. And Microsoft, still one of the biggest digital advertising companies out there today. They have a lot of their business that's overlooked, I think, with Bing and LinkedIn at the center of it. But they've made a series of acquisitions to improve their ad stack. And they're doing a handful of things that I think also fly a bit under the radar that position them really well for where I think some aspects of digital advertising is going. And maybe the biggest one on everyone's radar at this moment is gaming. Microsoft has been in the in-game advertising game, say that a few times fast, for a while now. So I think they've really innovated, but the potential acquisition of Activision Blizzard can really round out Microsoft's capacity, I think, to own this gaming channel from an advertising standpoint. Mm-hmm. But then they've got a lot of other things that they're doing on the retail front that have to do with advertising. They bought some ad tech recently. So I just think there's a lot more to it. When I put it together, I look at Amazon and Microsoft and I say, we're starting to get a new power center in the digital advertising world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was liking it to the Recode media graphic that they put together, where they've got these different circles dotted into what basically has created this kind of universe, and they show like Netflix is this big or Disney is this big, and they own these properties that kind of orbit it, and Warner Media and AT&T are this big, and it kind of shows you the media universe, everything kind of laid out and how big things are and who owns what. And I started thinking about a similar concept, but for what you're talking about with digital advertising, and it seems as though if you're too zoomed in on Microsoft or too zoomed in on Amazon, you're not really noticing all the things that they're doing and the different pieces they have orbiting the kind of center of gravity. And as you zoom out, you start to realize not just that they have all those different pieces, but that they're also growing and starting to, I guess the end game here, Andrew, is at some point they're going to start to threaten, challenge Google or Facebook, even if that is way into the future. It's similar to our forecast. We have Facebook and Google as the powerhouses in digital advertising, but Amazon's been slowly coming along and now is, in a pretty healthy third place. I guess the thinking for this is that at some point, all of this activity means that they could start to rival the duopoly.
I think that's the basic idea. If Microsoft and Amazon in particular are aligned with the highest growth areas of digital advertising, that was sort of the question that I began interrogating was, what would it take for them to really make a much bigger play if they're better aligned around those growth areas? And so, we can start to talk about what some of those biggest growth areas are in the future of digital advertising. Now, we of course know that today, though, search and display, and within display, social, those are the two key areas. That's not going to go away over the next several years. But as other things come up and the mixes change, that's when you start to say, what does the center of balance start to look like?
Yeah. Paul, what was your initial reaction to this idea of Seattle, not Silicon Valley, being the future of digital advertising?
My initial reaction was that there's a lot to be said for these two companies that we're talking about building on their ad businesses.
Amazon, Microsoft, right?
Yeah, we've talked a lot about Amazon. Microsoft, I don't think we've talked as much about, and I would second everything that Andrew said and add that first of all, they earned $10 billion just in advertising last year. And in addition to the components that Andrew talked about, they have the Bing search engine. They bought into ad tech, including analytics. They have LinkedIn. And obviously their purchase of Activision Blizzard, if it's approved, is going to go a long way toward positioning them as a major player in the in-game ad world. So there's a lot that they do behind the scenes. They don't get as much attention because they're a legacy player. They're not like the sexy new company like a TikTok. So I definitely agree that those two companies are doing a lot. And, we have been talking about the duopoly for a long time, but lately we've been referring to a triopoly, of which Amazon is the third leg of that stool and will only grow in its share. Having said all that, I think that there's a lot more going on in the ad world that I'd like to explore. So my position is that, yes, Seattle is drawing a lot of attention and investment, and there are a lot of opportunities around these two companies, but there's also a lot going on in other parts of the world, parts of the country, both, literally and figuratively, that I'd like to get into as we continue the conversation.
Yeah. So, Andrew, you came to me with this idea a number of weeks ago now, and you said you had this idea and you started to explore it further by basically scribbling down some thoughts almost back of the napkin, which turned into a more detailed analysis. Do you want to kind of walk us through some of that thinking to help kind of conceptualize this idea a little better for people?
Yeah, so the basic premise was to start to essentially rank how far along are the big four tech players. And I started to extend the analysis beyond Facebook, Google, Amazon, and Microsoft. But how are they doing, or how well positioned are each of them in some core areas of digital advertising growth? And so I can tick through those quickly. The 5 that I started looking at were retail media, which we've, of course, talked quite a bit about, connected TV. And this is certainly a big area of Paul's expertise. Gaming, digital audio, and then really specific to that is podcast advertising, which I am particularly bullish on as a growth area. And then digital in-store media, which in our forecast, we have digital out of home, which is kind of a rough comparison for that, but that's another potential growth area. So those 5 areas are, to me, big pieces of the future of digital advertising and where we go from here. And then it's a question of, so how well are these companies going to do in those areas? Are they positioned for that growth or not?
Yeah. And so you put them into a mini matrix. You companies down the side, Facebook, Google, Amazon, Microsoft, and then along the top you had those different parts of digital advertising, retail media, CTV, etc. And you gave them a rank 1 through 4, 4 being the best, 1 being the worst. And you came out with a raw total, and then you weighted them as well, because retail media is a bigger deal than audio, and at least probably definitely in the future, but definitely at this moment. And so they came out with some different scores, which were quite fascinating to look at. Do you want to talk us through what we landed on?
Yeah, and I will say this is still an analysis that is probably in process and needs to be refined. So I'll kind of high level the findings without giving a hard number, because I think some of them are up to debate. And maybe that's what this show will help do, is refine my thinking as Paul and I talk through them. But yeah, I mean, so, and I actually did an analysis where I did 1 through 5. So 1 was a laggard. Basically, you don't really have a discernible position in the market at all. 2, you're dabbling in the market, but you don't really have discernible traction. If you got a 3, you have some position with traction. 4, you have a strong position with significant traction, and then 5 would be you're the clear leader or the dominant player in each of those new areas.
It was 1 through 5. Okay, because no one got a 5, so I was like, they can't. But I'm just seeing
in the second analysis, there are 2 5s that I awarded.
Okay. So it is 1 through 5. Interesting. All right, very good. Paul, what is your reaction to this mini analysis before we take a quick word from our sponsor?
I'm looking forward to debating the numbers. I think, to Andrew's point, this is a really good starting point, but I think what would be great to do is to expand it beyond the 4 big players and look at some of the other companies that are also big players in the ad world and growing their footprints.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what this analysis has started to do. And you're right, you can continue to zoom out, because we spend a lot of time talking of Facebook and Google because they're the current dominant players. But what does the future look like? And as you zoom out further and further, you start to see some of those players come into focus. All right, we'll take a quick word from our sponsor, mPassCall, and then we'll be right back for the second half. At the end of the day, your customer has to be at the center of everything you do. This starts with the right customer data strategy, as well as the right foundation to solve the challenges that typically inhibit success, such as data quality, data governance, and connectivity. mPassCall is your real-time customer data infrastructure that helps you accelerate your data strategy by cleansing, visualizing, and integrating your customer data from anywhere to anywhere. Ultimately, better data leads to better decisions, better customer experiences, and better outcomes. See why the best brands choose mPassCall. Go to www.mpasscall.com. All right, folks, we're back. And in the first half, we kind of set the table talking about Andrew's idea of the future of advertising and some analysis he's been putting around this. The conventional wisdom that Facebook and Google own everything and will continue to, but when you start to zoom out, you realize that maybe they're not as best positioned as some of these other companies, Amazon and Microsoft in particular. We'll talk about some other ones a little bit further down the line, but we're going to go through some of those verticals that he talked about. There was 5 in total: retail media, CTV, gaming, audio, and in-store. And for the second half here, we'll start with the first 2. So Andrew, retail media, what jumps out to you with regards to how these players are best positioned?
Yeah, well, I guess I'll start with Amazon. They're the clear dominant player today, 77% of the US digital retail media market. I awarded them a 5. I think they're the clear dominant player with the best position and really all the pieces for the future of retail media coming into place as well. I think where it gets interesting is debating the next players, because they're all circling the space. In fact, everybody's looking at retail media right now and trying to figure out what their play is. Microsoft, I had in the middle. They have a position, most may not know, but they have Promote IQ, a company that they acquired in the space a few years ago. So that's actually a pretty decent position in retail media, has the potential to plug into other parts of their stack. So I said, they have a position with some traction. And then Facebook and Google, I kind of gave them 2s, but I could maybe see giving them a 3. It's not exactly clear where they're going with it, but they clearly work with a lot of retail advertisers. Facebook has social commerce, so that's potentially an input that becomes more important into a retail media play. But it's just not clear where they're going with it. So maybe 2 is a little bit harsh. Maybe it's more of a 3. But I think, they're certainly lagging Amazon in this equation.
Okay, so Amazon up front, Microsoft, and then Facebook and Google somewhere just behind that. Paul, do you agree?
Yep.
And what do you think is the most interesting part of this when it comes to retail media and these 4 players in particular?
Well, I mean, I think obviously Amazon is the biggest player in retail media. And, Andrew knows this a lot better than I do, this space. But my sense is that there are a lot of companies like Walmart, Best Buy, Target, just to name a few, that are really eager to monetize their ad potential. So I think we're going to see that world expand and Amazon will probably continue to lead, but their share will erode, not because of anything they're doing wrong, but just because more and more retailers are going to get into this space to capture those opportunities and connect dots.
And I agree there. And a key player is Walmart Connect, which I have to note, most of that work is coming out of Silicon Valley these days. So maybe score a point for Silicon Valley there.
Andrew, you just got back from Shop Talk last week, and you were saying that a big part of why that was so interesting for you was because of all the retail media conversations you were having.
Yeah.
Were those conversations kind of reinforcing this back of the napkin analysis that you did a few weeks prior?
It was, and I would say that I saw a lot of interest from the companies who aren't the first ones that you would think of getting into the game. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of intense interest. I will also say, and maybe it's the nature of the conference, but the focus on retail media globally and the excitement coming out of global markets like Latin America, Southeast Asia was very palpable too.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Was there one conversation that jumped out to you the most, one topic that you found yourself coming back to again and again at the conference with regards to retail media?
I think of all the different legs of the retail media stool, and maybe we can unpack this more in the part 2 episode, but the in-store digital media experience, right? So that's part of digital out of home, and we'll talk about it as its own leg, but that piece of the retail media equation ramped up in a much bigger way, that conversation, than I had anticipated going in.
Okay. Let's move to the next vertical here, CTV. Where do all these players land on this matrix?
So I awarded no 5s. I gave Google and Amazon both 4s, both having strong positions with significant traction. Obviously, Google with YouTube across platforms, Amazon with Prime Video. Microsoft, I gave a 3 because of the Xandr acquisition. So that brings them into the CTV game, potentially in a much more significant way. And Facebook 2, and I'd love to hear Paul's thoughts on this because, there's Facebook Watch. They have obviously a big video footprint, but they haven't seemed to make that leap into the CTV environment in a significant way yet.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I might even give Facebook a 1 because I think they've tried to venture into CTV with really very little or no success to date. I would also say that, I could agree with the argument that Google and Amazon are kind of neck and neck, but I'd probably, if there were decimal points on the scale, I might give Google a 4.3 or 4.4 and Amazon a little bit less, simply because I think Google has done more to leverage CTV with YouTube and with YouTube TV. I think Amazon is definitely heading in that direction with IMDb TV and with the potential for advertising on Prime, which they haven't done a lot of. So I think they're not as far along as Google. But yeah, I think both companies are definitely in the upper range of the scale when it comes to CTV.
Yeah. And I agree with you, Paul. Like Google deserves like a 4+ here. And you mentioned the exact right reasons. YouTube TV, right? We often go right past YouTube TV in the conversation, but that's a big piece of, digitally delivered connected TV viewing today. So they have a big slice. And then YouTube itself, the amount of viewing that has already jumped screens into the connected TV environment is massive. And they obviously have the whole advertising through video thing worked out. So yeah. So I think Google is, if I had to stack rank them, Google would be at the top.
Mm-hmm. Paul, what do you think is going to be the most interesting development to watch across these 4 different players? Is it the Xandr acquisition? Is it something that Facebook could potentially do? Is it Amazon's emergence to maybe one day threaten Google as the number 1 player on this list?
I think the most interesting part about it is Amazon's capability to disrupt the entire space. I think they're uniquely positioned to be a major player in all of the categories we mentioned. Retail media, for sure, they already are. Video, because I think they're only in the early innings of their game with video and CTV. In-store, to Andrew's point, coming back from Shop Talk, that's another place where Amazon, they have a physical retail footprint. I know they've had some issues lately and they're downscaling it, but they're still going to be a major player in that space. And of course, search. We think of Google as the dominant player in search, but if you look at the shares of search in the US, Amazon is growing that share. It's basically going to double in the space of a few years, and they're only going up and up. So I think not only does Amazon have a lot of capabilities in all those places, but they have a unique ability also to make all those things work together to connect those dots, which I think is part of why they're even, interested in advertising in the first place.
So play that forward for a second. With Amazon and CTV, what could you see being the next moves in their playbook?
Well, for sure, building IMDb TV, bringing Twitch, which they've already started doing, more into the streaming video world, not just in, game streams, but in entertainment. I think Amazon Prime, like Netflix, is really a subscription platform, but there is the ability to maybe convert that into more of a hybrid with ad support. I think if you look at some of the partnerships that other companies like Roku and Kroger have done, leveraging both retail media and connected TV, Amazon obviously is in a great place to do that. And of course, the MGM acquisition is probably not the last of their investments in entertainment. So they could acquire another company or a TV firm, or they could even launch a YouTube TV type of service if they wanted to. So all of those things are in, Amazon's quiver, as far as I'm concerned, looking to the future.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And just to add to that quickly, the MGM content, in order to get them better content for their free ad supported services, Paul mentioned IMDb TV. There seems to be a swirl that branding is just not great, and that they're probably going to rebrand the name of the service. But
awful
and
name.
Be able to kind of put it on steroids with some better content. That the NFL rights that they have this fall, and I feel like they're going to go out and acquire some more interesting content in the next year.
Yeah, I haven't even talked about sports, but that's a huge thrust for Amazon, and they are clearly, of all the tech firms, the leading player in terms of licensing sports content. And let's not forget that Jeff Bezos' initials are the same as James Bond's. So there's that.
There's something to it. That's what we've got time for this episode. It's time now for the post-game report. So Andrew, I'll start with you and then go straight to Paul. One takeaway from everything we've talked about today.
Well, I have to say, after talking through the first 2 pillars here of retail media and CTV, I've got to put Seattle in the lead. I think they're doing pretty well so far.
Okay. Paul?
Well, I will definitely acknowledge that Amazon is the player to watch here, and obviously they're headquartered in Seattle, but I think in part 2 of this episode, I'm going to argue for more of a distributed environment, a fragmented environment for advertising, that Seattle is a part of, but not maybe the center of gravity.
Part 2 is going to be tomorrow. We're going to be talking about this very topic, Seattle, not Silicon Valley, being the future of digital advertising, but focusing on gaming, audio, in-store, search, and social, and looking at some other interesting players as well outside of these big 4, and then figuring out where Paul and Andrew net out on this concept of shifting center of gravity for digital advertising. That's all we've got time for, though, for this episode. Thank you so much to my guests. Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you.
Thank you to Paul.
Always a pleasure and an honor still.
Thank you to Victoria, who edits the show. Thanks to everyone listening. We'll see you tomorrow for the Behind the Numbers Daily, an eMarketer podcast made possible by mParticle.